Hello, this is the second video in the series Introducing Arguments, and our topic today is how to identify arguments. Notice that the notion of argument that we'll be working with here is a technical one. So we're not talking about a barroom brawl or about a heated exchange. To see what an argument is, in the sense that it's relevant to us, we need to answer three questions. First, so what are the main building blocks or components of arguments? Now, those components, which types are there, and how do those types relate to each other? The building blocks of arguments are statements. So an argument is a series of statements. A statement is a sentence that asserts something, and it can be true or false. This notion contrasts with, say, the notion of a question, of a command. For instance, in these three sentences, only the first one is a statement, the second one is a question, and the third one is a command. And those are not the kind of things that can be true or false. Also, in every argument, there is a division of roles between the statement that needs to be established and those other statements that help that statement to be established. That is, the conclusion is the goal of the argument. That is what the argument is intended to establish. Whereas the premises are what is offered in support of the argument. So we have two kinds of members with different roles, the conclusion and the set of premises, which can be one or more. Finally, the relation between the components is reason giving, in the sense that the premises are intended to give reasons for the conclusion. In short, an argument is a series of statements comprised by two kinds of members, namely a conclusion and a set of premises, which can be one or more, where the premises are intended to give reasons for the conclusion. To determine whether a given passage is an argument, we have to determine whether the passage contains premises and conclusions. And it is only in case we have that division of roles that we are in the presence of an argument. And this can be done, that identification, because in most cases, there are words that usually tell you that what you're about to be presented with is a premise or a conclusion, right? So there are words that usually introduce premises and also words that typically introduce conclusions. Among the words that introduce conclusions are the following. Therefore, which usually introduces the conclusion of an argument. Another example is thus. There are some white grains on the table. Thus, there is salt on the table. There are some white grains on the table. So, there is salt on the table. There are some white grains on the table. Consequently, there is salt on the table. We have consequently too. And there are many other words such as wherefore and phrases such as accordingly, hence, consequently, we may infer that, it must be that, whence, it follows that, as a result, and along, etc. All of those terms and phrases tend to introduce conclusions. Also, there are words that introduce an argument's premises, such as since. But we have to watch out because since is ambiguous. It has a temporal meaning in which it marks the beginning of an event or process, and then there's a logical meaning which is non-temporal and which establishes a logical relation between, say, a statement and another, right? An example of the temporal meaning can be found in A. Since 1979, our company has been producing quality chairs. Now, an example that is not temporal is B. Since 5 has no positive divisors other than 1 in itself, it is a prime number. Now, since is only a premise marker in B, not in A. Another example of the logical use of since, for instance, Al has a lot of power since he is Minister of Propaganda. And well, here, the conclusion is that Al has a lot of power, and the reason that we're given for the conclusion is that he is a minister of propaganda. We also have for, just Al has a lot of power for his minister of propaganda. Because Al has a lot of power because he's minister of propaganda. And there are many other phrases that introduce premises, such as the ones that you have in this list. Now let's see if we can identify arguments. Now look at these passages and determine which ones are arguments and why. So if you want, you can pause the video. Number one is an argument. So remember that we saw that because, when followed by a statement, usually indicates that the statement in question is a premise. So everything that is underlined is premise. The rest of the argument is the conclusion, namely that uranium is heavier than iron. In other words, this argument seeks to establish that uranium is heavier than iron and gives as grounds for that the circumstance that gold is heavier than iron and uranium is heavier than gold. What about 2? Well, definitely isn't an argument because there's no distinction here between premises and conclusions. The only connective that occurs here is then, introduces the second sentence, but that is it only expresses succession, not logical consequence, right? So here we just have a conjunction of 2 sentences. There's no argument here. Now 3 could be an argument, depending on how we understand since. If we understand it in the logical sense, then it is an argument. For instance, somebody is arguing that Beth is not a nurse, that Beth is evil, and then the reason given is that she is not a nurse. So perhaps that person believes that all non-nurses are evil, right? On the other hand, if you take into account the temporal meaning, it wouldn't be an argument. For instance, as if you said, ever since Beth is not a nurse, she's evil, right? So you're just pointing the beginning in time when Beth became evil, namely when she quit being a nurse, right? Now here, well, this is not an argument, right? You're just pointing the location in time of an event. 4 isn't an argument either. It just cites 2 events in their chronological order. 5, however, is an argument. Here, so introduces the conclusion, right? So the conclusion is that she, that is Claire, must be evil. And what remains is a premise, right? And so we have an argument, and the conclusion is that Claire must be evil, and the premise is that Claire is not a nurse. Now take a look at these other passages. Now 6 is definitely not an argument, right? And 7 is not an argument if we understand since in the temporal sense, right? Namely that ever since Carl quit his job, he has become an evil person. But again, and this reading is less salient, it could be an argument if, for instance, you're using the premise is that Carl quit his job as a nurse, and the conclusion is that he must have become an evil person. And the assumption is that everyone who quits their job as a nurse becomes an evil person. So if you interpret it in this kind of odd way, it could be an argument. 8 can also be an argument. The thing is that we have no explicit argument words introducing premises or conclusions, but you can kind of gather by the situation, right? That you say, you must order your vegetizer now. They are selling like hotcakes. That the second sentence is proposed as a reason for you to accept the first one, right? So you must order the vegetizer now. And why? Because, well, there are certain like hotcakes. You might not find one if you wait. What about 9? Is it an argument? If a body is freely suspended at some point P so as to hang in equilibrium under gravity, then the center of mass G must be directly below P. Well, it actually isn't an argument. Can you see why? The reason is that it's not an argument, it's not a set of statements. It's just a single statement of the form if P then Q, where P and Q are arbitrary sentences. And so this is what is called a conditional statement, right? Because the condition is expressed in what comes after if. So it is a statement, a single statement, even if a complicated one. So the structure of this: if a body is freely suspended at some point P so as to hang in equilibrium under gravity, then, this is the second part, the center of mass G must be directly below P. So here we have A and B. Now, A is not an argument, it is a conditional statement, whereas B is an argument, right? A just establishes a condition, namely, if Al is nice, I will buy him dinner. Or, if Al is nice, then I will buy him dinner. This could be a premise in an argument. Now, B is an argument. First, the premise is Al is nice. Therefore, the conclusion, I will buy him dinner. So notice that in B, I'm actually affirming that Al is nice, right? And that for that reason, I will buy him dinner. Now in A, I'm not saying, really, I'm not asserting that Al is nice. That is in question, right? I'm just saying, if Al is nice, I will buy him dinner. So here we see the difference between arguments and conditional statements.